This episode is brought to you by 10,000, makers of high-quality, super comfortable training shorts and shirts. At the core of 10,000 are 3 training shorts built for all the ways you train. The interval short, versatile and great for HIIT, spinning, metcons, short runs, and anything else you can think of. The foundation short, built for durability for tough gym days and outdoor adventures. And the session short, super lightweight, perfect for running, yoga, and mobility. Matt, I think we both have the interval short and the session short. Which one's your favorite?
Doug, you can see I'm wearing this shirt right now. I actually don't have any pants on, so I don't have any.
But you have your 10,000 shirt on.
Yes, I do. I love it. It's super lightweight. So I'm gonna have to say that's my favorite thing. It's like my favorite workout shirt ever. So that's
I love that. My favorite is the session short, which is my go-to running short right now. It is just super lightweight and comfortable. I've been wearing it on my long runs. Haven't had any chafing issues that I traditionally have. It's a real winner. Mm-hmm. 10,000 is a direct-to-consumer company with no middleman, so you get premium fabrics, trims, and techniques that other brands simply cannot afford. Plus, they collaborate with a team of over 200 athletes who test their gear to ensure the perfect design, fabric, trim, and fit. Just pick the short that best supports your training and then personalize it with the custom liner and inseam options. Then get free shipping and returns and their special lifetime guarantee. 10,000 is offering NMA radio listeners 15% off their first purchase. Go to 10,000.cc and enter code NOMEAT to get your 15% off. That's TENTHOUSAND.cc and enter promo code NOMEAT to get 15% off.
This episode is also brought to you by Green Chef, the #1 meal kit for eating well. Green Chef is the first USDA certified organic meal kit company, Doug. Enjoy clean ingredients that you trust, seasonally sourced for peak freshness. Go to greenchef.com/NoMeat100 and use code NoMeat100 to get $100 off, including free shipping. Here's how it works. Green Chef lets you choose from a wide variety of easy-to-follow recipes perfect for keto, paleo, and plant-powered diets, or even if you just want to eat in a more balanced way. When your food box arrives, you'll have all the pre-measured, perfectly portioned ingredients all prepped and ready to go. These recipes are quick and easy with step-by-step instructions to take out any guesswork. Everything is hand-picked, featuring organic veggies and high-quality proteins delivered to your door, pre-measured, and mostly prepped in insulated packaging. Green Chef's vegan and vegetarian recipes are high in plant proteins and rich in omega-3s. Doug, you know that I am a huge fan of Green Chef. As I always say, when we're out of practice, we forget we didn't make dinner, didn't plan it, because planning meals is just one of those things that I swear that's the hardest part of making dinners is someone planning the meal. Like that's just the MVP of the household. If you actually plan a meal at night, you don't have to make it. You don't have to go get the stuff. Just think of what we're having. Yeah. Green Chef does that for you. That's why we love it. Plus they do the shopping and the prep too.
Yeah. And you know, I've always said this when we talk about Green Chef, I've been super impressed that their vegan options actually taste great. They are designed for vegan eaters and not just designed for, to accommodate that or to check that box.
Go to greenchef.com/NoMeat100 and use code NoMeat100 to get $100 off, including free shipping. That's greenchef.com/NoMeat100 and use code NoMeat100 to get $100 off, including free shipping. I just said the same sentence 2 times in a row. All right, Doug, I think we are 5 weeks away from the first ever Golden Gate Spartan Trail Classic, the race that we have partnered with Spartan on to do the aid station foods and things so that our plant bites will be there. And it's 100% vegan race, 100% plant-based race. But as I said last week, I think my wife, Erin, she was going to run her first 50K there, but she's had these falling issues and she still has not really gotten over, I guess it's a fear of falling, but also just hasn't quite convinced herself that she's not going to fall again with the work she's been doing. But anyway, we were perusing other ultras that she could do as an alternative. I mean, we'll still be out there. I'll still be running at least the half marathon. Not sure if I'll try to do more, but anyway, we found a 50K and it's nearby and it's in the former hometown of Andre the Giant, the wrestler. That was the claim to fame of this little town.
Is it the Andre the Giant 50K?
No, it's not even named after him. There's no, unless you Google the name of the town because you don't know where it is, you would never find the little Wikipedia article that says its claim to fame is that was where he made his home.
That is hilarious
and
awesome.
It's called the Derby. And
it's what? It's
Eller. I think it's Ellerby. I don't know how to say it. ELLERBE. It's 50 miles away or so from Charlotte. And the race is called the Derby. Just a little loop 50K. And
on road or on?
Yeah, road like gravel and paved road. So it's my
Okay.
wife will likely have no falling issues, and I don't know if I'll do a loop or two or something maybe that day if I can.
Well,
But also
that's
while looking, I
awesome.
also found out there's a Spartan race in North Carolina. I'm sorry, Spartan. There is a Spartan race actually.
Asheville.
But yeah, well, there's also there's like another trail classic. Is that the one?
Yeah, there was one recently in Asheville, or right
Okay.
outside Asheville. Yeah.
Okay. But anyway, there's a Badwater race. What I meant to say.
Ah.
Cape Fear. You know that one?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like
I've heard of that
50K
one.
or 50 mile, and you run most of it on the beach. I think that's
Yep.
kind of the hard part, is that it's beach and windy and all that. Yeah, that kind of piqued my interest, but not for this coming year, but maybe one day.
Well, that's exciting for Erin. That's really exciting.
It is. I was a relief to find that because she's had
Is it soon? Is it going to fit her training cycle?
It's the week after Spartan, so it's pretty perfect.
Wait, isn't that Thanksgiving?
Yes, Thanksgiving weekend. It's the Sunday after Thanksgiving.
Well, that is awesome. Congratulations
yeah,
to her.
hopefully it works out.
I look forward to hearing how that goes. Unfortunately, I have some bad news. I have some heartbreaking news that I know that, you know, the legions of people who are running the Spartan race are going to be just wildly disappointed.
I've heard for a lot of people who were going to it just because you're going to be there.
I know,
and that was their primary reason.
That was their reason, and yeah, I don't know what I'm going to do, because unfortunately I had to make the call to bow out of the race this year. We've been talking it up. I've been honestly incredibly excited about the whole event and the whole everything going out there and seeing people and running the race itself. But it just with everything else we have going on that week and the next week with No Meat Athlete and Complement, just fortunately isn't going to work out for me to take that trip. So I'm not going to go. You're still going to go. Most of the team is still going to go. And so if you're a fan of No Meat Athlete, then the real star of the show, Matt Frazier, and his wife will be there. but yeah, I'm sad. It would have been cool to meet some people, and we know at least a few people are going because of No Meat Athlete's involvement, and it would have been fun to see them.
Yes, would have been fun. Would have been a good team event too, because I haven't met a lot of the people on our team in person yet. I think we have like 14 people now or something like that. And a bunch will not be going for the same reasons you're not, with work stuff going on. But it'll still be a good time. I'll still be out there, and still running, and should be a good time still. Really looking forward to it.
Yeah, absolutely. So I have a race coming up in a couple weeks.
That's right. I knew that.
I think 2.5 weeks
Got
out.
into that somehow. And that race is what? 50K?
50K.
Okay.
Down at Lake James near us.
Mm-hmm.
The Fontaflora 50K.
Oh, I know that one in Nebo.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes. I've been to Nebo a little bit. Cool.
You've been to the race?
No, I've been to Nebo. My dad knows a guy who lives there, and we've gone to his house.
Okay, yeah.
It's
So I'm quite looking forward to this race. I think it'll be a good way to. It'll be my first race. My last race was like 2 weeks before everything shut down in February of 20. What was that? 2019.
Was that Mount Mitchell?
That was Mount Mitchell. Yep. I still have a very vivid memory of sitting in the pre-race briefing the night before with several hundred people crammed into a room and people talking about that crazy virus that was going on over in China. And then like 2 weeks later, everything changed and I haven't run a race since. So this will be my first race back, and I'm just super excited to push myself with 50K, because that'll feel like a really long way for me right now. And that'll be fun. But I did a fun training run I'll tell you about last weekend.
Okay, make it quick because our guest has arrived.
Oh, our guest has arrived. Well, then no, let's not bother. I was trying to kill time.
Okay, we'll do an intro of next show.
There you go.
All right, here comes the guest.
Okay, who's it gonna be? Hey guys.
Did you know Robby and Cyrus? I feel like the world knows Robby and Cyrus. I don't know if you know them, Doug.
Sure. Well, I've never met them.
Hey, how you guys doing?
Hey, how's it going?
Okay. Robby's disappeared temporarily. How's it going?
It's great to be here. Doug,
Yeah.
It's
nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you as well. This is great.
What's up? Nice to meet you guys. Nice to meet you, Doug.
Yeah.
So for those who don't know, Robby and Cyrus are the guys behind Mastering Diabetes, which is a New York Times bestselling book. And they were kind of mentors of Robert and me in the process of becoming New York Times bestselling authors. They told us, I think when we were trying to choose an agent for this book, our agent ended up referring us to Robby and Cyrus and said, "Hey, these are clients of mine." And I had a big conversation. That's when I met you guys, I think. So really from the very beginning, you guys were there and helping us do it. And we did, and it was a success. And you guys were immensely supportive. So I'm very grateful and excited to have you on, because I can't believe we haven't had you on the podcast yet.
It's great to be here, Matt. And congratulations. You guys wrote an incredible book, and it's helping a lot of people. So kudos to what you guys are doing and will continue to do for many, many years to come.
Yes, hope so, for sure. So anyway, I don't think we've done the surprise guest format with 2 guests ever. So I don't know how, I hope Zoom holds up well enough with Claudia, but it seems like it will. But yeah, I mean, I don't even think we've had an episode, Doug, where we've talked about diabetes very much. I must admit, diabetes is kind of a blind spot of mine. It's just like, it's never really impacted me or anyone that I know well. Or if it has, it hasn't been like a public thing that I was involved in or anything. So I'm kind of curious about like the 101 of that stuff. But I also want to talk to you guys about, blood sugar in general, because that's something that maybe, even if diabetes, I'm sure it affects a lot of people in our audience, but maybe not directly too many of them, but perhaps it does. But I think blood sugar and the idea of like, the role that sugar in general plays in a healthy diet, especially for athletes. I think that kind of stuff is super interesting. So we'd love to talk to you guys about that. And then of course we'll hit on your summit, what's it called? The Blood Sugar Revolution?
Blood Sugar Revolution Summit. Yep.
Yes. So that's coming up soon. So we can definitely get into that as well. But yeah, I guess why don't you you guys are both type 1 diabetics. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Both
okay.
of us have type 1.
Good.
Yep.
So I kind of know the difference between type 1 and type 2, but honestly, if I had a test and it wasn't multiple choice, I would be I'd do horribly. So I'd like to have the 101 on diabetes. What's type 1, what's type 2, and and just your stories too.
Okay, cool. Yeah. So there's the different flavors of diabetes. It used to be that there was just type 1 and type 2 diabetes. But then over the course of time, as research has gotten more involved in learning about the different pathophysiology of diabetes, a number of different, what I refer to as flavors, have arisen. So there's type 1 diabetes, which is what Robby and I have. Then there's type 1.5 diabetes. Then there's pre-diabetes, there's type 2 diabetes, and there's gestational diabetes. So that's sort of like 5 different classes of diabetes. And then there's this new version of diabetes, which is referred to as type 3 diabetes, which is actually cognitive decline or Alzheimer's. Huh. And so it's, diabetes is sort of like expanding as a collection of symptoms, and it's affecting, researchers are finding that it affects different organ systems at different ages. And so that's why it's becoming a little bit more complex. But to simplify things, there's basically 2 types of diabetes, if you really want to like classify them into 2 different categories. The first category is autoimmune, and the second category is not autoimmune. All right. So autoimmune basically means that your immune system, it has been, tricked or coerced or programmed into mounting an attack to your own beta cells, which manufacture and secrete insulin inside of your pancreas. And when that happens, then your insulin production begins to get compromised. So as you lose the ability to manufacture and secrete insulin, then your blood glucose starts to rise. And that right there is a telltale sign of developing an autoimmune reaction, right? So type 1 diabetes is autoimmune. Type 1.5 diabetes is also autoimmune. Now, to keep things relatively straightforward, type 1 is a autoimmune version of diabetes in which some collection of factors has sort of hijacked your immune system into creating this problem and killing the beta cells inside of your pancreas. What causes it? Researchers don't really know the answer to that question. We know that there's an association between people who drink cow's milk at a young age and or babies who are not breastfed for a significant amount of time and the development of type 1 diabetes. We also know that there's certain viruses, particularly there's one called the Coxsackie virus, which can increase your risk for the development of type 1 diabetes as well. And now there's also research that shows that there's a particular mycobacterium in food called MAP, and MAP, whether it's found in meat or whether it's found in dairy products, can also raise your risk for type 1 diabetes, right? So there's this whole host of different things which could create type 1 diabetes. And if it does happen, then you get what Robby and I have, which is your blood glucose becomes extremely high in a very short window of time. I found out because I was in college. I was 22 years old, which is relatively late. Type 1 is usually diagnosed when you're 3 years old, 5 years old, 12 years old, somewhere sort of in adolescence. And I got it when I was in 22. And all of a sudden I checked my blood glucose, or sorry, I felt terrible. I mean, I was urinating frequently. I had no energy, and I just could not concentrate. So I ended up checking myself in to go to the hospital. And when I was there, they were like, "Oh my Lord, your blood glucose is so high. You are in this thing called DKA, which is a sort of like emergency state, at which point type 1 diabetes is like setting in." Right. And so when your blood glucose is that high, the only thing that medical professionals know how to do at that moment in time is to basically give you IV fluid and then give you insulin to try and lower your blood glucose value. Over the course of time, they end up finding out, a bunch of other things about your endocrine system. And then they, fully can classify you with type 1 diabetes. But the idea here is that if you get an autoimmune diagnosis, it generally sets in under the age of 30. It's an autoimmune reaction, and it forces you to have to inject insulin. There's no other substitute. You have to inject insulin. And until there's some type of therapy or some type of like magical operation, if you will, that can like restore beta cell or insulin production, you're going to be insulin dependent the rest of your life, right? So it can be a tough diagnosis, because it's like, imagine if all of a sudden you woke up one day and you were like, I don't really feel that well. I feel low energy. And why am I so thirsty? And why am I urinating, every 30 minutes? That doesn't make sense. You go to the doctor says, hey, you have type 1 diabetes. Oh, by the way, you have to inject insulin 3 to 6 times a day, every single day for the rest of your life. Like the mental overload that happens in that moment is just like, it's hard to describe in words, right? But that's what happens to people with type 1. Now,
so that's you. So you have to do that. You have to inject 3 times a day or more for the rest of your
so
life.
you basically have to inject when you eat breakfast, lunch, and dinner. So that's called like mealtime, what's referred to as mealtime bolusing. Okay. And then there's also another insulin that you have to take as well, which is a sort of like drip irrigation, long-acting insulin. You inject that once a day, and that's kind of in the background the entire time, just working to make sure that your blood glucose is regulated, independent of the food that you choose to put in your body.
Gotcha. And then what's the role of diet then in managing it? Like why eat a plant-based diet at that point to try to, like, I guess if you've got to do that anyway,
yep.
What do you get by managing with diet?
Yeah, like what's the advantage
of
using a plant-based diet versus a ketogenic diet or some other low carbohydrate diet? Okay.
Or managing at all. Like what if you don't manage, but you just do the injections?
Okay. Very good question. Very good question. So you kind of have a choice. Whether you're living with type 1 diabetes, whether you're non-diabetic, whether you have heart disease, whether you have kidney disease, whether you're totally healthy, every single human being has a choice of what they put into their mouth, right? And you can choose to eat, the standard American diet if you want. You can choose to eat fried foods and packaged foods if you want. You can choose to eat a low carbohydrate diet if you want. You can choose to eat a plant-based diet if you want. And there's pros and cons to every single approach, right? We know, from like ample research and from, paying attention to experts over the course of time, that the standard American diet is kind of a walking disaster. And that regardless of whether you have a pre-existing condition or not, if you eat the standard American diet, chances are you're likely to develop some type of chronic disease over the course of time, right? Now, in the world of type 1 diabetes in particular, or the world of diabetes in general, there's sort of like people are sort of being funneled into one of two different paths. Path number 1 is the low carbohydrate diet, and path number 2 is the plant-based diet. And the low carbohydrate messaging is really strong, like unbelievably strong. And so when you're diagnosed with any form of diabetes, whether it's type 1, 1.5, gestational, you name it, the medical institution and everybody else on the internet is telling you, eat a low carb diet, low carb, low carb, low carb, low carb, low carb, because that's the way you control your blood sugar. That's what you do, right? And so most people, did my video just freeze?
It did a while ago, but it's okay. We can just work around somehow.
All right, switch cameras.
Hey, now it's back. No.
Okay. So what most people do is they receive this messaging and they're like, oh, okay, a low carb diet is the way to go because carbohydrates are bad for me. Carbohydrates are going to make me fat. They're going to make me more diabetic. They're going to cause my blood sugar to go higher. So then they basically avoid carbohydrates at all costs. So what that leads them to do is stop eating or reduce their intake of things like fruits and potatoes and whole grains and legumes. And instead they eat more white meat, red meat, fish, chicken, dairy products, oils, and, you know, avocados, nuts, and seeds, because those are all low carb foods, right? So what people discover in a short period of time is that as soon as they do that, their blood glucose actually comes down, and it's very controllable. So they're like, okay, cool. I'm eating these low carb foods. My glucose is controllable. My, what's referred to as your A1C value, which is a sort of like long-term marker of your blood glucose health, that number comes down. Fantastic. Oh, hey, I lost a little bit of weight. That's even better, right? My blood pressure's down. My triglyceride levels are down. Fantastic, right? So on a piece of paper, a low carbohydrate diet often leads to good short-term results. But what we find, what the research shows, and what we've also found with working with more than 10,000 people over the course of time, is that even if the results look good in the short term, even if your glucose is controllable, even if your insulin use went down, even if you lost weight and your blood pressure came down and your triglycerides came down, oftentimes what happens is that over the course of time, call it a year, 2 years, 3 years, people who eat these low carbohydrate diets end up with other symptoms. They end up with other problems. And these other problems become louder and more problematic than diabetes was in the first place. And these other problems include things like impaired digestion, low energy. Sometimes people lose weight initially, and then they start gaining weight again. Their blood pressure comes down, and then their blood pressure goes back up. Their triglycerides come down, their triglycerides go up. Their cholesterol comes down, their cholesterol goes back up again. And so they see that, like, over the course of time, they're like, wait a minute, it worked at the beginning and now it doesn't work anymore. And I feel terrible. What is going on? And at that point, we start to educate people. We're like, hey, listen, a low carbohydrate diet actually is causing a lot of these problems, because what a low carbohydrate diet is doing is it's sort of masking the symptoms of high blood glucose, if you will, but it's creating a metabolic revolution, a metabolic disaster inside of you. It's creating more insulin resistance inside of your liver. It's creating more insulin resistance inside of your muscle tissue. And as a result of that, if you fast forward the clock and just move 1 year, 2 years, 3 years into the future, all of a sudden you end up with a whole host of metabolic problems, and that can become a really big issue. So to answer your question, well, why would you do a plant-based diet? The answer is, it's simple. If you do a plant-based diet, okay, a plant-based diet is an opportunity for you to get very good short-term health. You'll see a lot of the same results that you will on a low carbohydrate diet within the first 3 months, 6 months, no problem. Weight loss, lower triglyceride, lower cholesterol, lower blood pressure, lower A1C, lower fasting blood glucose, lower post-meal blood glucose. All of that will happen, no question. But the beauty is that in the long term, you don't see this reversal of all those things. Okay, that stuff continues. If you continue your plant-based approach, if you continue eating a nutrient-dense diet, if you continue keeping your fat intake relatively low like we recommend, and if you continue keeping your animal product intake low or non-existent at all, then all of these improvements that you see in the short term continue into the long term, and then it becomes an excellent long-term solution that increases your longevity over the course of time.
And does all that apply to type 2 diabetes as well? Same?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, it applies to, type 2 and type 1, for no question.
And then as you're saying this, I'm thinking, like, I've heard these same arguments outside of diabetes conversations when we talk about plant-based versus paleo or keto. And we talk about, paleo making people look all strong and everything in the short term, but then in the long term, they have all these problems. Are the things you're describing, these short term, long term benefits and issues, is that specific to diabetics, or is this exactly the same mechanism as happens to someone who doesn't have diabetes? And you're just talking about people with diabetes. I mean, do you see what I'm saying?
It's a very similar mechanism. Yeah, you're absolutely right. So the story that I just told you absolutely happens in people living with diabetes, living with pre-existing diabetes, but it also happens in people who have no health diagnosis to begin with, or no disease diagnosis to begin with.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And there's plenty of research that demonstrates this, right? When you eat a low carbohydrate diet, what you do is you actually are dramatically increasing the total amount of dietary fat, especially the total amount of saturated fat that comes predominantly from animal sources. In addition to that, you're eating more animal protein. In addition to that, you're eating less carbohydrate energy. In addition to that, you're eating less fiber. In addition to that, you're eating less antioxidant compounds. So the evidence-based research has demonstrated that there's a whole collection of compounds that come from the plant-based world that are not only beneficial, but necessary for optimal health. And those include carbohydrate, fat, and protein, absolutely necessary. But then in addition to that, vitamins, minerals, fiber, water, antioxidants, and phytochemicals, right? So there's sort of like 9 classes, if you will, of nutrients that are absolutely necessary. So when you eat a low carbohydrate diet, what you end up doing is you get a little bit of carbohydrate, a small amount, not too much to talk about, right? You get a significant amount of fat and a significant amount of protein, okay? So those are the two sort of like predominant macronutrients. And then as far as the micronutrients are concerned, your vitamin intake goes down. Your mineral intake goes down. Your water intake goes down. Okay, your fiber intake goes down dramatically. Your antioxidant intake goes down dramatically. And your your phytochemical intake goes down dramatically, right? So you're basically cutting out 7 of the 9 classes of nutrients, which are necessary for optimal health. And yet we're expecting that the end result of that is going to be improved longevity. It doesn't make sense. Right.
Interesting. And by the way, I don't think I introduced you as Cyrus Khambatta, PhD, but you are that, and you speak like you are that. What is your PhD in?
Yeah, so my PhD is actually in nutritional biochemistry.
Ah, okay.
So it's like the super nerd science of nutrition.
that is very nerdy.
Yeah.
So I do want to touch on type 2 and the difference between type 2 and type 1, because type 2 is not autoimmune and it can be reversible. Is that right?
That's right. Absolutely. Yeah, there's no question about it. So type 2 affects, like, I think the most recent statistic is like 92% of the diabetes population around the world has type 2 diabetes. So it's like the majority of the diabetes population, right? And so type 1 affects, less than 10%. So Robby and I, okay, fine, we're important. We have our own particular stories, but the real story of diabetes is what's happening in people with pre-diabetes and type 2, right? And to answer your question, Doug, is type 2 diabetes reversible? And the answer is yes. And an overwhelming an overwhelming proportion of all people who are living with type 2 diabetes, it's a reversible condition. But what's important to understand, whether or not you're trying to determine whether or not you can truly reverse type 2 diabetes using your food as medicine, using your diet as your primary tool, is you have to also know how much damage the beta cells inside of your pancreas have experienced over the course of time. So without getting too technical, we'll just basically say that if you've been living with type 2 diabetes for, call it, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years or so, chances are the amount of damage that's happening inside of your pancreas is still overcomeable, if that's a word. Okay. And if you switch over to a plant-based diet, the way that we described, lower your total fat intake, lower your animal product intake, and really eat as many plants as you possibly can, what we see most of the time and what the research suggests is that most of the time you can reverse type 2 diabetes. But then there's a small proportion of the population for whom they've experienced a significant amount of damage to those beta cells, those same beta cells that Robby and I don't have anymore. And if there's a significant amount of damage that's happened to those beta cells, then it becomes harder and harder for those people to use diet only to reverse type 2 diabetes. And usually what they end up having to do is change their diet, no question. But then in addition to that, they also sometimes have to inject small amounts of insulin in order to control their blood glucose with precision.
Now, Doug, here's the thing I would like to add here. So I appreciate Cyrus acknowledging that we're important too. Thank you, Cyrus. Appreciate that.
I'm here for you.
And part of it's our own personal story that led us both to discover this research independently and then come together, which is that if you're living with any form of insulin-dependent diabetes, so Cyrus and I, we inject the long-acting insulin and the short-acting insulin that Cyrus just described. We inject both. So because we're doing that, we can easily monitor on a meal-by-meal basis what lifestyle decisions make us more insulin sensitive or more insulin resistant. And our entire platform and everything that we're going to be talking about in the Blood Sugar Revolution Summit is all about reversing insulin resistance. That is the topic to talk, and that applies for everybody listening to this. Even if you haven't been diagnosed with pre-diabetes, there's estimates that 90% of the population is insulin resistant. That comes first. So we have this experience. Okay, we make these lifestyle changes, and we see that what we're doing is making the insulin we inject far more effective. And so that led us to go look at the research. Like, wait a minute, what's going on? Is this known about? Are we unique? What's happening? And so that experience that we literally have every single day, every single time we eat food, reinforced with this teaching, is the actual solution to most people living with type 2 diabetes, just like Cyrus said. So if you're living with type 2 and you're producing plenty of insulin, the only thing you have to tell yourself is, what do I do to make that insulin work more efficiently? And I can get rid of type 2 diabetes in the vast majority of cases. For pre-diabetes, you've caught it so early that you can get rid of diabetes 100% of the time. You just have to make your own insulin work more efficiently. And that's how we developed the Mastering Diabetes method and put it all together. And now we're trying to get that out to as many people as possible.
So I'm sure there's some secrets that we can't reveal without getting into the book or the summit, but what's, in sort of broad strokes, like what version of a plant-based diet is the one that you guys choose and teach as far as reversing diabetes? I'm guessing it's not a high-fat version based on conversations we've had before. Is it the kind of Chef AJ, super high carb, very, very low fat, extremely low fat, or like fruitarian type thing? And Robby, I know you're kind of a fruit nut, I believe. So I'm just curious about that.
It's a great question. And it's funny, yesterday I was just walking down the street and I was thinking about this. I was like, hey, if we're talking to people, like trying to explain what we do here, like, because what we do, it is even different than, many of the most popular plant-based diets, even the forks over knives version, or, a Joel Furman version. Like, we have a little bit of some key differences, which are very important for people who are looking to truly reverse insulin resistance. And on this walk, Matt, I can't say I actually came up with the exact words. I'm still trying to figure it out. But it's a very, I think what I came up with is our diet is highly unrefined. Like, we really, really focus on having whole foods in their intact form. And that's how we developed a simple traffic light system. So you have green light foods, yellow light foods, and red light foods. And, similar to what you're saying with Chef AJ, it is very high in carbohydrate, and particularly low in fat. But there is an emphasis on making sure you do get the appropriate amount of fat that you need. And that comes when focusing on whole foods. So the green light category has fruits, starchy vegetables, legumes, intact whole grains. Okay, those are the first 4 categories. Then there's leafy greens, non-starchy vegetables, herbs, and spices, and mushrooms are also listed in there. But the order is very particular. So we are teaching people to make sure you get enough of these plant-based foods, because the number one mistake people make when transitioning to a plant-based diet is they don't eat enough calories. They start eating a lot of salads, a lot of carrots, a lot of vegetables, but they get hungry an hour or so after a meal. They're like, oh, wow, like I didn't get enough protein. This diet isn't satisfying. I have to go eat a cheeseburger. All of a sudden they feel better. They get more energy because they got more calories. So people come to us, they're afraid, like Cyrus was describing earlier, they're afraid to eat carbohydrate-rich foods. And that's a complete mistake. It's a misunderstanding of what's actually causing the blood glucose elevations. And so once you understand, okay, no, I got to embrace those foods, you have to learn to eat a large volume to stay satisfied and really enjoy the diet long-term. So that's the green light. And the green light category is all whole foods. Nothing is refined in any way, shape, or form. The only thing that would be technically refined is the fact that some things are cooked and you might have removed the water content. But other than that, it's whole foods.
No flour, no flour.
So that's not in the green light category. Okay, it's a great question. So now we move into the yellow light category. And these are foods that we're suggesting that people, they absolutely eat, they include in their program, but you just have to be cognizant of how much you're consuming if you want to truly maximize your insulin sensitivity. So green light, it's almost impossible to overeat on those foods. So much water, so much fiber. If you eat when you're hungry till you're satisfied, it's very difficult to eat too much. But the yellow light category, these are foods that are either higher in their fat content or they're just a little bit more refined. So the higher fat foods would be nuts and seeds, avocado, soy products are in there, coconut meat would be in there, olives would be in there, durian is a high fat fruit. So
the worst fruit also.
That's debatable. So those are all great foods, very healthy. A lot of research showing the benefits of those foods. We're just saying you have to be careful of how much you're consuming. If you can't just sit down and watch a movie and snack on cashews and expect to manage your blood glucose in the ideal way. It's just not going to work. And then the more refined foods, that would be things like, brown rice pasta, or pastas being made out of beans these days, or Ezekiel bread, like a really clean, or a millet bread. These are good foods. Certainly can be a part of your program, but it's not as ideal as consuming the whole intact form that those foods were made from. So it's better to have millet than millet bread, especially if you're looking to lose weight, which happens for a lot of people with prediabetes and type 2. So the calorie density of the millet is going to be much more favorable to you losing weight than consuming millet bread. So that's the yellow light category. And the red light category, these are foods we're suggesting people minimize or avoid completely. These are the foods that are known to cause insulin resistance, are known to make you more insulin resistant. And that's going to be animal products. So you have red meat, white meat, fish in there. Then we have oils in that category, all oils. And of course, any processed food. So whether a Twinkie, obviously that's going to be in the red light category. But again, if you're trying to optimize your insulin sensitivity, some of these more processed meat analogs are not going to serve you well. We're going to put that in the red light category, minimize or avoid completely. And so we have this simple traffic light system, and really teaching people to feel confident and really understand that focusing on the green light category, you will get all the nutrients you need, the protein, the fiber, you're going to get that, plenty of essential fatty acids. We have an insurance policy of, a ground tablespoon of chia seeds or flaxseed each day to ensure you're getting your alpha-linoleic acid. So that's really how the program works. It's very simple. We really try and make this simple and not overcomplicate people's lives.
Can you go back to the fruit a little bit? Because I think when people hear that as a green light food, they're, as you, I'm sure, hear all the time, it just doesn't seem like it should be, just because the teaching that sort of is ingrained in everyone's head that fruit is, first of all, that fruit is bad, perhaps.
Absolutely.
Are any fruits totally fine as long as they're whole? Or do you care about glycemic index and all that stuff? Or is it just, if it's whole, it's good?
No. So we wrote about this in our book for sure. So like you said, we can't give away all the secrets, Matt. You can register for the summit, or you can pick up the book.
So where, if people want to go to the summit, where can they go to do that? Is that
bloodsugarrevolution.com.
Okay. And that's a free thing, right? You can just get
totally free,
all the stuff or whatever.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So just a quick thing on the summit. Basically we run a summit every single year. And the purpose of the summit is to basically educate people all around the world about things that they can do to dramatically improve their blood glucose health or their blood sugar control using their food as medicine. And so this year we interviewed 21 physicians and researchers and New York Times bestselling authors to really understand how, what are their insights on how to control blood glucose and, control all the tentacles related to diabetes as well. And so that summit is running from November 3rd to November 10th of this year, which is just in a little bit here. So if anybody's interested, go to the bloodsugarrevolution.com and you can register directly there. 100% free.
100% free.
Yes,
it's you don't want to miss this. Okay. So register, but just so people know also, Matt, they can buy the book and they can get that anywhere. Page 220.
That's not 100%
full scoop,
free, right?
That one's not free. Actually, I take Doug back. It could be free because if you go to Audible and you've never created an Audible account, you can get the audiobook. Your first credit is free. And we read the book and we added some extra material in the audiobook, some actually new research that came out before the book was, had to be printed and all that stuff, or after the book was printed. So the audiobook is quite fun. But you also, Doug, you can get it for free if you go to your library.
Hey,
okay, there you go.
All right, so there we go.
There you go. I like it.
Doug, you should be I think you were a local library supporter.
I am. I don't know why I didn't think of that.
But in short, the answer is long term, as you're transitioning and become more insulin sensitive, all the whole fruits should be just fine. It shouldn't be a problem. You should have no problem consuming them. There are some nuances if you're living with insulin-dependent diabetes. How do you dose for these fruits? But if you're living with pre-diabetes, type 2, you have plenty of insulin production, you should not have to even think about how much you're eating of any of the whole fruits. And that's because whole fruit is a heck of a lot different than the refined sugars that you might hear about in the research. You're having all the water, all the fiber in this particular package, all the nutrients in a package that digests differently. And of course, we're teaching people to eat fruit in a low-fat environment. So we understand where the confusion is coming from. And if you're living with some form of diabetes and you are able to test your own blood glucose and you have an experience where you ate a mango, you ate a banana, and you test yourself and you say, oh, wow, I'm 200, I'm 250. It's logical to be like, wow, like the fruit caused my blood glucose to go high. I shouldn't eat the fruit. The fruit's the problem. But that person just hasn't had the opportunity to get educated and understand that it's actually the underlying issue of insulin resistance, which made their body unable to metabolize the glucose in the fruit, and that it was actually the high-fat diet they've been eating previously that led to the insulin resistance. So that's really what's happening. And as you become insulin sensitive, you do not have to worry about fruits. And the glycemic index is very misleading. It doesn't factor in nutrient density of foods. It doesn't factor in the fat consumption that people had previously. And so we're not suggesting that people get worried about the glycemic index of any given food.
So you mentioned fat there. Is it, and earlier Cyrus mentioned that it's sort of either high fat or high carb is an approach for short-term management or treatment. I've heard this sort of thing with weight loss as well, that like you can be really low carb or really low fat and you can lose weight. Is there something about having both at the same time that sort of makes everything go wrong?
Yeah, it's a phenomenal question. I'm actually glad that you brought that up, because I think that's one of the most misunderstood concepts in the world of, nutrition. And it can get easily twisted to make you think that like, there's multiple solutions and or you're doing something wrong, But the truth is that if you look at like the actual biochemistry of lipids, which are things that are fat soluble, and then things that are not fat soluble, what you'll find is that those two types of nutrients have a very difficult time interacting with each other. In fact, they're like two opposing magnets that just like absolutely hate each other. So carbohydrate and fatty acids are just that. The carbohydrate is water soluble, meaning that it dissolves in water very easily. Fatty acids are fat soluble, meaning that they dissolve in lipids easily and they find home in lipids easily. So when your diet contains a significant amount of carbohydrate energy and a significant amount of fat energy, what ends up happening is it creates a whole cascade of metabolic traffic jams inside of your liver, inside of your muscle, inside of your blood vessels at the same time. And a lot of it is due to the fact that the entire machinery that's responsible for digesting and transporting and uptaking and oxidizing and storing carbohydrates is completely different than the machinery, the enzymatic machinery that's required to digest and transport and uptake and store and oxidize lipids. And so what happens is that the reason why both of these work, meaning the reason why you can eat a low fat diet and get good results, or you can eat a low carbohydrate diet and get good results, is because one of those two is kept low while the other one is the predominant fuel source, right? So in the low carbohydrate scenario, you are eating a small amount of carbohydrate and eating a significant amount of fat. And what you're doing is internally, you're suppressing your carbohydrate metabolism enzymes inside of your liver, your muscle, your kidney, your blood vessels, your brain, you name it. And so as a result of that, the fat metabolism enzymes and that whole symphony is now being used as your primary energy source. On the flip side, when you increase your carbohydrate intake and lower your fat intake, now you're relying on those carbohydrate enzymes to perform their symphony, and you're sort of inhibiting all of the lipid enzymes at the same time, right? So, going in either direction is going to get you some metabolic benefit. The problem is the standard American diet. The problem is when you try and eat both of them at the same time. And what you're doing is you're basically saying, hey, liver, I want you to uptake and process and store and oxidize all of these carbohydrates. And simultaneously, I want you to do it with lipids. And your liver's like, come on. Like from a biological perspective, I can't do both of those at the same time efficiently. I can do both of them, but it's going to cause a whole cascade of metabolic issues. And your kidney says the same thing. And your pancreas says the same thing. And your muscle says the same thing. So that's why when the two of them are present in high concentrations, the whole show shuts down. Which is why it's necessary to sort of like play the game where you're sort of tipping the side towards carbohydrate, tipping the side towards fat. And we talked about the fact that when you're eating a more animal-based diet, when you're eating a higher fat intake, you end up with good short-term results, but crappier long-term results.
All right, and then what about sports? I believe you guys both are athletic types, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So type 1 diabetes has not kept you from those pursuits at all.
No,
Absolutely not.
definitely not.
So have you, I mean, like every athlete who's kind of halfway serious thinks about sugar and think about, immediately post-workout or pre-workout, they're in some way managing their blood sugar levels, even if they're not calling it that. Have you guys developed, or kind of because you monitor so much, like have you learned anything interesting about post-workout fueling and things that, maybe someone else hadn't noticed, or things that are maybe are kind of common knowledge, but you actually observe it because of the monitoring you do?
100%. Yeah. There's actually we could write a whole book on like the interesting insights that happen in people who are athletic as it relates to blood glucose management. And one of the things that frustrates me is that when you go onto the internet and you look at the blogosphere and you look at Google and people are suggesting that the only way to control your blood sugar is to eat a low carbohydrate diet, even if you're an active individual, it just frustrates me. It really does, because the biochemistry is just not right. Okay. So without going into like, a 3-hour long discussion here, there's a couple of things that are very worth noting. Number one, glycogen. Okay. Glycogen is the storage form of glucose in your liver and in your muscles. Okay. Glycogen is a fuel. Glycogen is a storage form of glucose, and glucose is the fuel, right? So athletes, when they perform specifically higher intensity exercise, are more reliant on glycogen for fuel than athletes who perform low intensity exercise over a long period of time. But both types of athletes, whether you're at high intensity or lower intensity, are using glycogen every single moment of their athletic endeavor. So whether you're doing a high intensity interval training class or whether you're running a marathon, you are burning glycogen 100% of the time. There's no questions asked. Okay?
Even if you're like a fat adapted type runner who's burning some fat?
Yeah. So that's the thing, is that what most people think is that, whether you're burning fat or whether you're burning glucose, it's either like, it's like binary. It's like a light switch. You either like burn fat or you burn glucose. The answer is that's not true. The answer is that you're burning glucose. Or sorry, I shouldn't say burning. You're oxidizing glucose and you're oxidizing fatty acids at all times. Like you're doing it right now at rest inside of your muscle tissue and inside of your liver. And so am I, and so is Robby, so is Doug, right? But if you were to pick up and you were to just like start running, then what your muscles would do is they would change how much fuel they're using from each one of those depots, right? So if you went on a long endurance run, you might use a higher proportion of fatty acids that are present inside of your muscle tissue and that are coming out of your adipose tissue, and a little bit less glycogen, right? If you were to increase your speed and start running and you were going to go a little bit more anaerobic, then all of a sudden your fat utilization would go down and your glucose utilization would go up, right? So it's like these things are being burned at all times. It's just a question of like which one is being burned at a higher rate than the other ones. So point being is that glycogen is very important. It's important for all athletes. And there's this common wisdom that let me put it this way. There's a lot of athletes who don't think about their glycogen stores and they don't care about their glycogen stores. The only time they think about it, I'm sure you've seen this a lot yourself, Matt, is like the day before a race or like 2 days before a race, where they're like, I'm going to go eat a giant meal of pasta because I'm going to carb load. And then that's going to give me it's going to increase my glycogen store. So that way I'll have more energy on the day of my marathon. Right. And the research actually shows that carbohydrate loading does work, right? In other words, like if you're eating a normal carbohydrate intake for a long period of time, and then you have one big meal that contains a lot of carbohydrate energy, you're going to manufacture just a little bit more glycogen from that meal than you did on your previous diet. But what if I were to tell you that you could glycogen load or carb load every single meal, right? What if you could carb load for breakfast and then do it again for lunch and then do it again for dinner? And then you did that tomorrow and the next day and the next day and the next day, right? What would happen is that your glycogen stores would increase by like 2%, 3%, 5% over the course of time. And then before you know it, now all of a sudden your glycogen stores have become significantly larger than they were 2 to 3 weeks ago, right? So eating a plant-based diet and eating a diet that contains a significant amount of carbohydrate is a way of chronically carb adapting or chronically carb loading. Okay. So that's number one. Number two, athletes are obsessed with protein. Okay. Whether you're a strength athlete and you just want more mass, more muscle protein, or whether you are an endurance athlete and you want stronger muscle tissue that's more resilient and, you know, has higher endurance. Everybody wants either more protein, more muscle protein, or they don't want to lose any of their existing muscle protein, right? But what I think a lot of athletes don't understand is that in order to manufacture protein, there's many things that have to happen. Number one, there has to be an adequate amount of protein in your diet, an adequate amount of amino acids that are coming in from the food that you're consuming on a daily basis. But in addition to that, there also has to be an adequate carbohydrate content as well, because when your carbohydrate content is significant, it is high, not only are you able to store glycogen, but that is the signal for insulin utilization, for insulin production and utilization. Insulin is a very strong protein manufacturing signal. So if you're consuming a significant amount of carbohydrate, then the amount of insulin in your blood is going to go up just enough to stimulate what's called net muscle protein synthesis in the recovery state, right? So in other words, if I were to take two groups of athletes and I were to say athlete group number one is eating a high protein, low carb recovery meal versus group number two that's eating a high protein, medium carbohydrate recovery meal, the group that's eating a medium carbohydrate is actually going to end up producing more net muscle protein synthesis in the post-recovery, in the recovery state, because that carbohydrate energy is actually stimulating insulin to help the protein synthesis machinery. Does that make sense?
Yeah, makes sense. And actually agrees with I think people would find it sort of counterintuitive that when you look at the guidelines of how much the carbohydrate to protein ratios you should be eating pre, during, post-workout, you know, it kind of varies depending on who you ask, but in general, there's this trend to be about around 3-to-1 before workout and 5-to-1 carbohydrate to protein after workout. So actually more carbohydrate relative to protein after workout than before.
Yes.
And that kind of goes along with that. So that's actually really interesting.
Yep, absolutely right.
Now, Matt, this is a fascinating conversation. And what I got to do, I actually have to get an Uber and get on an airplane. I got to head to a baby shower. So I'm going to go carb load at each meal for the rest of the day. And tomorrow and the next, I'm going to eat some bananas. I'm going to eat some papaya. You guys have fun, and I'll catch you on the next one. All right?
All right. Sounds good. Thank you, Robby.
Safe travel. See ya.
Thank you.
All right, cool. So, yeah, I guess just to put it into practical terms, and then we'll wrap up anyway pretty soon. What kind of things would you suggest someone eat post-workout, just from this perspective? Like, what's a typical post-workout meal that you or Robby would eat?
Okay, cool. So post-workout meal, usually what I recommend, there's like many ways to slice it. So if you enjoy eating fruit, which I personally do, eating a massive fruit bowl. When I say massive, I really do mean massive, right? Eating a massive fruit bowl that contains something like, I don't know, anywhere between 600 and 1,000 calories coming predominantly from fruit, right? So that might include something like 4 bananas, maybe like 1 or 2 papayas, 1 or 2 mangoes, some fresh berries on top. And then maybe you want to sprinkle on some flax seeds or some flavor addition, some cocoa powder on top of that, right? So that bowl right there contains, 7, 8, 9 servings of fruit. And that may sound like an absurd amount of fruit to be eating at one meal, but what I have found personally, and I've also, talked about this with many other athletes, is that when they're eating a predominantly fruit-based recovery meal, they actually find that their recovery times shorten significantly. So, if you're used to sort of, taking 24 hours to recover between, pretty decent sized efforts, when you're eating a predominantly fruit-based meal afterwards, that recovery time can go from like 24 hours down to like 16 hours. Sometimes I find that it goes down as low as like 12 hours, which enables me to push harder and more so that I can work out even more, and get more out of my workouts. Another thing that, I recommend people to do is make a smoothie. Okay. Because a smoothie is another way where you can add a protein powder, right? Whether it's the complement protein powder or whether it's a different protein powder that comes either from like hemp or pea protein. Those are my 2 favorites, right? So you can take the fruits that I just described, you can throw them into a blender, you can add some protein powder into that bad boy and up your protein content on that particular meal. Okay. Another option would be to eat legumes. Okay. Legumes and a starchy vegetable. So the legumes are going to come either from like beans, peas, or lentils. right? And then the starchy vegetable will come from things like potatoes or squash or corn, right? So if you have some combination of the two of those, then you're getting a significant amount of carbohydrate energy from the starchy vegetables, and then you're getting a slightly higher protein content from the legumes as well, right? So, a meal that I love to eat sometimes after I'm done working out is like the largest bowl of chickpeas I can possibly find, right? And then, in addition to that, I might have some like roasted potatoes to come along with it, or I might even have some fruit to come along with that, because there I'm getting, both the carbohydrate as well as the protein content at the same time. I'm curious, what do you choose to eat after a workout?
The thing I most want usually is fruit. Like that's kind of just what I tend to do. It's not really a conscious choice. I mean, I know it's a healthy thing, so it's not like I'm afraid of it by any means. But if I've got mangoes or watermelon around, that's what I will typically want to eat when I'm done working out. I'm also really into like, if it's a longer run, I tend to be craving salty things. So like a bowl of rice with soy sauce on it or something. To me,
right.
that would be relatively delicious as well. What about you, Doug?
I remember you told us that when we interviewed you last time, and I was like, "Oh, white rice and soy sauce. It's very tasty."
I used to like end runs near a grocery store, and this is in the very old days, maybe even before No Weight Athlete, and I would just go into the store, it's all sweaty and terrible, and buy like a loaf of white bread baguette that they had made and just eat the entire thing. I don't do that anymore, but I used to.
Very tasty.
Yeah, I turn to the smoothie basically after every run. Do a smoothie with some protein powder, and that's it. Just like you said, craving the fruit, just kind of fulfills that, and then also is just really easy way to get a bunch of calories in. But other than that, I really like burritos, basically all the time. So but especially after like a really long run or something like that. So beans and brown rice and some sort of tortilla.
Yeah. I mean, you really can't go wrong with that. And I think there's also this misconception that like, if you choose to eat kind of like the same foods over and over and over again, that somehow you're going to develop a nutrient, you're going to become deprived of particular nutrients, right? Or there's the other one that like, if you're eating white rice, you have to eat beans with that same meal. Otherwise, you're not going to get a full array of amino acids. And then you're going to become essential amino acid deprived, right? You have to protein combine, which has been disproven by science as well, right? So I like the fact that you guys are sort of like gravitating towards the same meals. I do the exact same thing. And I think that's what most people should become comfortable with, because there's so many nutrients available when you're eating a nutrient dense diet from plant-based foods, that this idea that I'm going to become nutrient deprived actually doesn't really exist.
Yeah. And are smoothies, are they green light for you guys? Like, is it okay to process the fruit in that way? Just blend it up?
Great question. Technically speaking, a smoothie is going to be like in a yellow light category. And the only reason for that is because when you're drinking a smoothie, because it's like pre-processed by the actual blender, the glucose from the carbohydrate just gets into your blood a little bit faster than it would if you were just chewing it with your teeth, right?
So that massive bowl of fruit would be the green light version of that?
Bingo, exactly right. It's the same stuff, but you either like don't process it and it's green light, or you slightly process it with a blender and it turns yellow light. But I mean, you see me drinking a smoothie literally like at the beginning of this podcast. I drink a smoothie pretty much every single day. And I just make it a point to do two things. Number one, if you're living with some form of diabetes and your glucose is, you try and you control that. Number one, target a smoothie for the post-workout state when there's a significant amount of what's called non-insulin dependent glucose uptake. Fancy way of saying you can get more glucose into your muscles for free after a workout than you can before a workout, right? That's the first thing. So target the smoothie after your workout. And then secondarily, just drink it kind of slow. That's it. Don't gulp the whole thing down. Take 30 minutes to drink it rather than 5, and you should control your blood glucose nicely.
So I don't mean to put Matt kind of in the hot seat here, but he's been flirting with this a lot of like fruit juicing or vegetable and fruit juicing, right? Matt, am I
almost entirely vegetable juice?
Okay,
almost nothing. I only put a tiny bit of apple in there to sweeten it, but it's like a quarter of a tiny apple.
Yeah. So what where does that kind of fall into the red light, green light categories?
Let me preface this quickly. I recently, not recently, a few weeks ago, I did sort of analysis. I was putting all these beets and carrots and cucumber and celery and lemon, all this stuff. But I figured out how much because I figured the vegetables were like, free, like there's no sugar in those things. Well, I looked at it and I was eating like a triple size version of a normal juice. I think I was having like 36 ounces of juice, and it would have all these things. And like every beet would have 6 grams of sugar, and the carrots would each have, I don't know, 3 or something that I was juicing. So like the amount of sugar in this juice I was having was something like, I don't know, 30 or 40 grams of sugar, without the fiber and things that come with it. So even without putting a lot of fruit in there, you can still create a lot of sugar in a juice. So I adjusted it after that and kind of stopped putting the beets in, not to mention they were expensive. But anyway, so I made a lower sugar version that I have been doing recently.
Got it. Okay. So the one recommendation I would say is, rather than use the word sugar, so like on the side of like the nutrition facts label of many of the foods that we consume in the grocery store or get from the grocery store, it says like sugars, and then it lists the amount of, effectively what it's listing is the amount of glucose and fructose that's present inside of the food that you're consuming, right? The problem with using the word sugar is that from a biological perspective, it's an accurate term to use the word sugar, because glucose is a sugar, fructose is a sugar, lactose is a sugar. All of these things that end in ose are sugars. There's no question about it. But what we've done as a society is we call sugar the white crystal that comes in a box, right? That the actual sucrose, right? And we know through lots and lots and lots of research and programming that like sugar in a white crystal is not good for you, and that it will cause many metabolic problems over the course of time. So people, as a society, we've come to learn sugar equals bad. Don't eat sugar, right? But from a biological perspective, the sugar that you should be eating is actually foods that contain glucose and foods that contain fructose naturally, right? So because it's become a little bit complex, what I tell people is when you're talking about carbohydrates, try not to use the word sugar. And instead of using that word, use the word glucose, because glucose is actually what your brain uses as a fuel. It's actually what your muscle uses. It's actually what your liver uses as a fuel. And that's the prized fuel that we're looking for from food, right? So just like you're saying, Matt, is that when you made that vegetable juice and you added beets and you added carrots, you found that the, quote unquote sugar content, what I would modify that and say the glucose content went up. And that's actually not necessarily a bad thing, because again, the glucose is fuel for your muscles. And if you're drinking it in the post-workout state, as an example, that glucose literally can get like almost a free ride directly back into the muscle from that you used during the workout, which is good because it goes in to store more glycogen for the next time.
Okay. So even though the fiber is removed and it's not the whole fruit by any means, that fruit juice, especially in post-workout state, but maybe in other times, that could be an all right thing to have sometimes.
Yeah, but I like your strategy, which is that, make it predominantly vegetable juice with like a little bit of an addition of a fruit. It's not the end of the world, right? You're going to add a little bit of an apple. You can add some orange. You can add some beets. You can add some other vegetables that have a higher glucose content. It's not a big deal. Contrast that versus if you told me that you were drinking a juice that was, 2 oranges, 2 apples, and a pineapple with like a little bit of celery, I might be like, hold on a second. Now you're just getting a very large glucose load with effectively zero fiber, right? So that could cause problems down the road.
Yeah. Gotcha.
Yeah.
Very interesting. I wish we could go on for hours, Cyrus. This is really, obviously you have a ton of knowledge about this kind of stuff. And I think I could learn a ton by talking a bit. So,
absolutely.
Yeah, we got to cut it off here though. We're at the hour mark. But please, to get more information, obviously there's masteringdiabetes.org, which is your guys' site, and you can get the book Mastering Diabetes, which is an amazing, great book. You absolutely should check that out. And then, of course, the summit, which is coming up very soon.
Correct.
You said bloodsugarrevolution.com. Is that right?
That's exactly right. Bloodsugarrevolution.com, and it's going to go live from November 3rd to November 10th of 2021. So just go straight to that website, and you can, if it's interesting to you, what we're going to be talking about is basically how to control your blood sugar and, or your blood glucose, whatever you want to call it. And you do not have to have diabetes in order to participate. That's the key. Okay. There's a lot of people who are like, oh, I don't have diabetes. This is not pertinent to me. But the answer is actually it is, because we're teaching you diabetes prevention strategies as well as diabetes management and diabetes reversal strategies at the same time. So all three can be, you can learn about all three of those by participating.
Cool. Lots of experts, New York Times bestsellers like Cyrus, PhDs like Cyrus, I'm sure. Yeah, lots of good stuff. Bloodsugarrevolution.com. Check it out. Cyrus, thank you so much for joining us, and please extend a thank you to Robby as well.
You guys rock. Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Doug. I had a pleasure. I had a lot of fun, and I appreciate it.
All right. Sounds good.
Thanks
Thanks
a
for
lot.
coming on. Talk to you later.
Okay, bye.
Bye.